Have you ever been catfished? When did a first date become a nightmare? After 6 months of recovering from my ex Arthur, I was finally ready to meet someone new. And this guy Ben from the dating app seemed perfect. I got to the bar 20 minutes early and grabbed a small table near the back where we'd agreed to meet, texting Ben that I was here wearing the red dress like I'd promised. He texted back immediately saying he was 5 minutes away and couldn't wait to finally meet me in person after 2 weeks of talking every night. I ordered a wine to calm my nerves and kept watching the door, my heart jumping every time someone walked in. 7:30 came and went, then 7:45, and my excitement started turning into that familiar sinking feeling. I texted Ben again asking if he was close, but the message didn't even show as delivered. By 8, I was fighting back tears because I'd been so sure this one was different, that I was finally ready to trust someone again. I was about to leave when someone said, "Stella, is that really you?" And my whole body went cold because I knew that voice. Arthur was standing there looking better than I remembered, wearing the expensive jacket I'd bought him last Christmas, smiling like he was genuinely happy to see me. I wanted to run but didn't want to make a scene, so I just said hi and turned back to my phone, praying Ben would text. Arthur asked if he could sit down just for a minute, said he knew I probably hated him, but he'd been in therapy and wanted to apologize. He looked so different from the angry person I'd left, and I was feeling vulnerable from being stood up, so I said fine, just for a minute. He ordered a beer and said, "You look beautiful. That red dress is new, isn't it?" Which made me uncomfortable because how would he know what was new? But I just nodded. He said therapy had helped him understand how controlling he'd been, how he'd pushed me away with his jealousy, and he seemed genuinely remorseful. I started to relax slightly, thinking maybe he really had changed. He asked what I was doing here alone, and I said I was supposed to meet someone, but they hadn't shown up. Arthur's face shifted to sympathy, and he said, "That's terrible. What kind of guy would stand you up?" I shrugged, not wanting to talk about it, but he kept pressing. "Was it a first date? Someone from an app?" he asked, and I wondered how he'd guessed that, but figured it was obvious. He said online dating was dangerous, that you never really knew who you were talking to, and something about how he said it made my skin prickle. I tried to change the subject, but Arthur asked, "What was his name? Maybe I know him." I said it didn't matter, but Arthur insisted, saying, "Come on, was it Ben? That seems to be a popular name these days." My blood went cold because I hadn't told him the name. Arthur must have seen my face because he quickly said, "Lucky guess. There's like 5 Bens at my gym." But now I was noticing things like how he'd ordered my favorite beer for himself, the one he'd always made fun of me for liking. He asked what Ben did for work, and when I didn't answer, he said, "Let me guess. Something with computers? Maybe web design?" That was exactly what Ben had told me, and my hands started shaking. Arthur leaned closer and said, "You know what's funny? I've been trying online dating too. It's amazing how easy it is to become someone else entirely." My mouth went dry as he continued, "All you need are some photos from an old college friend's Instagram, a fake job, a whole new personality." He was watching my face intently as he said, "The hardest part is keeping track of all the details, like remembering to mention the hiking trip to Colorado or the golden retriever named Max." My heart froze because those were Ben's exact details. I stood up to leave, but Arthur grabbed my wrist, not hard but firm. "Don't go yet. We've been having such nice conversations these past 2 weeks." My whole body was shaking as I realized I'd told him everything about my new apartment, my work schedule, how I still hadn't changed the locks because I'd been meaning to get around to it. He knew I lived alone now, knew my roommate had moved out last month, knew everything. Arthur's grip tightened and he said, "I knew you wouldn't talk to me as myself, but you opened up so much to Ben." He was smiling now, that same smile from when things used to go bad. "But you also said you're not scared anymore, that you're stronger now. Should we test that?" I tried to pull away, but he wouldn't let go. "I've watched you try to escape me for 6 months, and now you invited me back in without even knowing it. And now I'm not letting you get away from me again. Not ever." I yanked my wrist harder and his fingers dug in deeper, making me wince. The couple at the next table kept glancing over and whispering to each other. My voice came out louder than I meant when I said to let go of me right now. Arthur's smile didn't change, but his grip got tighter and I could feel my hand going numb. More people were looking now, and I saw the bartender walking toward us with a concerned look on his face. He was tall with sleeve tattoos and asked if everything was okay here while staring right at me. Arthur let go of my wrist immediately and turned on that fake charm, telling the bartender we were just having a conversation about old times. But the bartender, whose name tag said Gideon, kept his eyes on me and asked again if I was okay. While Arthur was looking at Gideon and explaining how we used to date, I mouthed the word help as clearly as I could. Gideon gave a tiny nod and stepped closer to our table, positioning himself between me and Arthur. He told Arthur he needed to leave the bar right now or he'd call the police. Arthur stood up slowly, that dangerous smile still on his face, and leaned close enough that I could smell his cologne. He whispered that this wasn't over, not even close, then walked toward the exit with his hands in his pockets like nothing had happened. I watched him push through the door, but I knew he wouldn't just leave. He never did when he was like this. The bar manager came over, a woman with short gray hair who introduced herself as the owner. She asked if I needed them to call the police or if I wanted a ride somewhere safe. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped my phone when I tried to pick it up. She suggested I wait in her office while they figured out a safe way to get me home. Gideon walked me to the back office, his hand hovering near my elbow in case I stumbled. He brought me a glass of water and told me to take deep breaths while the manager went to check if Arthur was really gone. I sat in the leather chair trying to stop shaking while Gideon stood by the door like a guard. The manager came back and said Arthur was standing across the street, just watching the front entrance of the bar. She said they'd call me a ride that could pick me up from the back alley so he wouldn't see me leave. We waited about 20 minutes before my phone buzzed with a text from the driver saying he was in position behind the building. Gideon walked me through the kitchen and out the back door, checking both directions before nodding that it was clear. I ducked into the car and told the driver my address, then spent the whole ride twisted around in my seat watching to see if any cars were following us. The driver must have thought I was crazy, but he didn't say anything, just took a longer route with more turns like I asked. When we got to my apartment building, I threw cash at the driver and ran from the car to the front door. My keys rattled in my shaking hands, and it took 3 tries to get the right one in the lock. Once I was inside the lobby, I took the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator because I couldn't stand the thought of being trapped in that small box. I ran up 4 flights and down the hallway to my door, fumbling with the locks again. Inside my apartment, I slammed the door behind me and immediately dragged a chair from the kitchen to wedge under the doorknob. I went to every window, checking the locks and pulling the blinds down, even though I was on the 4th floor. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as the reality hit me that Arthur knew exactly where I lived. He knew I was alone here since my roommate Amy had moved out last month. He knew what time I got home from work, what days I did laundry, when I went grocery shopping. I'd told Ben all of that stuff over the past 2 weeks, thinking I was talking to someone new. My legs gave out and I slid down the wall next to my bed, pulling out my phone to call Willow. She answered on the 2nd ring and I could barely get the words out through my crying. I told her about Arthur being Ben, about him grabbing me, about everything. She said she was getting in her car right now and would be there in an hour, but I needed to call the police immediately. I hung up and grabbed my laptop, pulling up my messages with Ben while my hands kept shaking. Every sweet text, every photo he'd sent of that golden retriever, every detail about his fake life was right there. I started taking screenshots of everything, making sure to get the timestamps and his profile information before he could delete anything. My phone kept buzzing with notifications, but I ignored them, focusing on documenting every conversation we'd had over the past 2 weeks. I opened a new document and started typing out everything Arthur had said at the bar while it was still fresh. The hiking trip to Colorado, the web design job, how he'd known about my red dress being new. I wrote down how he'd grabbed my wrist, what he'd said about watching me for 6 months, his threat about not letting me go. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I remembered more details, like how he'd ordered my favorite beer that he used to hate. I saved everything to 3 different places on my computer and emailed copies to myself, just to be safe. About 45 minutes later, I heard footsteps running up the stairs and then Willow's voice calling my name through the door. I moved the chair and let her in, and she immediately wrapped me in a hug while I started crying again. She had an overnight bag with her and said she wasn't leaving me alone tonight no matter what I said. We sat on my couch and she helped me organize all the evidence into folders on my laptop. She made me eat some crackers even though I felt sick to my stomach, then insisted we had to go to the police first thing in the morning. I barely slept that night, jumping at every sound in the hallway, even with Willow sleeping on the air mattress next to my bed. The next morning we drove to the police station and I asked to speak to someone about cyberstalking and harassment. Officer Mariana Garcia came out to meet us, a woman about my mom's age with kind eyes and a serious expression. She took us to a small interview room and listened while I explained everything from the beginning. She took notes as I showed her the screenshots, the fake Ben profile, and my written account of what happened at the bar. Officer Garcia explained that what Arthur did was actually several crimes including cyberstalking, identity fraud, and harassment. She created an incident number for my case and gave me a card with the case information on it. She told me I needed to document absolutely everything going forward, every text, every call, every time I saw him anywhere. She gave me pamphlets about getting a restraining order and said the court would take this seriously with all the evidence I had. She also said I should change my locks right away and start varying my daily routine so I'd be harder to track. Back at my apartment, I called a locksmith while Willow got on the phone with my building manager about the security situation. The locksmith said he could come that afternoon, and I paid extra for the rush service because I couldn't stand knowing Arthur might still have a key. Willow convinced the building manager to come up and look at our hallway security camera to see if Arthur had been around. The manager, an older man named Mr. Jang, said he'd review all the footage from last night and the past week. He also promised to have security do extra patrols on our floor and to alert all the door staff about Arthur. Around 2 that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped as I read it because it said, "You looked scared last night. We need to talk about us." I knew it was Arthur even though it was a different number than his usual one. I took a screenshot right away and forwarded it to Officer Garcia's email like she'd told me to do. She responded within an hour saying she'd add it to the file and that I should keep documenting everything. The locksmith arrived around 3 and spent an hour installing new deadbolts on my door. He gave me all 4 copies of the new keys and suggested I get a door security bar for extra protection. He also recommended a ring camera for my door so I could see who was outside before opening it. I ordered both items online immediately, paying for overnight shipping even though it cost a fortune. While the locksmith worked, Willow called my brother Travis and told him what was happening. I could hear him yelling through the phone, not at her but just angry about the whole situation with Arthur. He said he was leaving work right now and would drive up from his place 2 hours south. Travis arrived around 6 that evening with a toolbox and a duffel bag, saying he'd install all the security equipment himself when it arrived tomorrow. He was so mad his face was red and he kept pacing around my apartment checking all the windows and testing the new locks. He said he should have done something about Arthur months ago when I first left him. That evening, while Travis made us dinner, Willow helped me deactivate all my social media accounts. We went through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, everything, and either deleted or made them completely private. Then we changed every single password I had, from my email to my bank accounts to my Netflix. Willow set up 2-factor authentication on everything while Travis went through my whole apartment checking for anything weird. He looked behind picture frames, under lamps, inside air vents, making sure Arthur hadn't left any cameras or recording devices. The next morning, I was making coffee when someone knocked on my door. Through the peephole, I saw a delivery person holding a huge bouquet of red roses. My heart started racing because I knew who they were from before the delivery guy even spoke. He said they were for Stella and tried to hand them to me, but I stepped back and said I wasn't accepting them. The card attached said, "For my Stella, from your Ben," in handwriting I didn't recognize, probably because Arthur had ordered them online. The delivery person looked confused but shrugged and left with the flowers. I grabbed my phone right away and called Officer Garcia about the flowers, my hands still shaking from seeing that card. She picked up on the second ring, and when I told her about the roses from Ben, she got real serious and said this was escalation, that stalkers often send gifts to maintain control. She asked if I still had the delivery slip, and when I said yes, she told me to keep everything as evidence. Then she said she wanted to connect me with someone who could help navigate all the legal stuff, a domestic violence advocate named Brooke Swanson who'd worked hundreds of cases like mine. Officer Garcia gave me Brooke's number and said she'd already texted her about my situation, so I should call right away. I dialed the number and Brooke answered immediately, her voice calm but urgent as she said she could meet me that afternoon at the courthouse to file for an emergency restraining order. 2 hours later, I was sitting across from Brooke in a small office at the courthouse, watching her organize all my screenshots and evidence into a thick folder. She explained how the restraining order process worked, that Arthur would be notified within 24 hours, and that often made things worse before they got better. She helped me fill out form after form, asking detailed questions about every interaction, every threat, making sure we didn't miss anything that could help the judge understand the danger. The whole process took 3 hours, and by the end my hand was cramping from writing, but Brooke said we had a strong case. 2 days later, I had to go back to work, and I was jumping at every shadow in the parking garage, checking behind cars and taking different routes to my desk. I went straight to my supervisor's office and told her everything, showing her the restraining order paperwork and explaining why I might seem distracted. She was really understanding and said they'd have security escort me to my car after work. That employee safety was their top priority. The morning went okay, but during lunch I got a text from reception saying someone was here to see me, that my boyfriend was waiting in the lobby with a surprise. My whole body went cold because I knew it was Arthur even before security called to confirm. I told them he absolutely wasn't my boyfriend and wasn't welcome here, and they said they'd handle it. 20 minutes later, security called back to say they'd removed him from the building after he refused to leave voluntarily, and that I should file another police report. I spent my lunch break at the police station again, filling out more paperwork while the officer took photos of the security footage showing Arthur in our lobby. That night, Travis insisted on walking me to my car, and when we got there, he stopped suddenly and pointed at something under my back bumper. He got down on his hands and knees to look closer, and his face went white as he told me not to touch anything, that there was a GPS tracker stuck to my car. He carefully removed it with his work gloves while I called Officer Garcia again, and she told us to bring it straight to the station without touching it with our bare hands. We drove there immediately with the tracker in a plastic bag, and Officer Garcia met us at the front desk looking grim. She said this changed everything, that the tracker was enough to upgrade the charges from harassment to stalking, and they'd be arresting Arthur tonight. She warned me to be extra careful over the next few days because arrests often triggered dangerous behavior in stalkers who felt they had nothing left to lose. Willow insisted I stay at her apartment, and I packed a bag while Travis did another sweep of my place for any other devices. For the next 3 nights, I barely slept at Willow's, jumping at every noise even though I knew we were safe on the 4th floor with a doorman building. I kept checking the locks and looking out the peephole, expecting to see Arthur somehow even though I knew that was impossible. On the 3rd night, my phone rang at 2 a.m., and I almost didn't answer until I saw it was an unknown number from Arthur's area code. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Dax Collier, Arthur's roommate, and said Arthur had just been arrested at their apartment an hour ago. Dax sounded shaken as he explained that after the police left, he'd gone into Arthur's room and found notebooks filled with information about me, photos taken without my knowledge, detailed plans for the fake Ben profile. He said he had no idea Arthur was doing any of this and wanted to help however he could, that he felt sick knowing this was happening in his apartment. The next morning, Dax met with Officer Garcia and handed over 3 notebooks and a USB drive he'd found in Arthur's desk. Officer Garcia called me later to say the notebooks contained 2 years' worth of surveillance notes, including places I'd gone, people I'd talked to, even what I'd worn on specific days. The USB had hundreds of photos of me taken from across streets, through windows, at the grocery store, at work, everywhere I'd been for months. Arthur's bail hearing was scheduled for the next morning, and Brooke said I should come to show the judge how this was affecting me. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, and Arthur appeared on a video screen from jail wearing an orange jumpsuit, his lawyer arguing that he wasn't a flight risk and should be released. The judge reviewed all the evidence, the tracker, the notebooks, the photos, and set strict bail conditions including no contact with me directly or through third parties, GPS ankle monitoring, and staying at least 500 feet away from my home and workplace. Even with all those restrictions, I didn't feel safe because I knew how smart Arthur was and how he always found ways around rules. 3 days later, Brooke called to say we needed to start getting ready for the restraining order hearing scheduled for next week. I met her at her office downtown where she had a conference room set up with boxes of papers and folders spread across the table. She handed me a yellow legal pad and told me to write down every single incident I could remember with Arthur, even the small stuff from when we were dating that seemed weird at the time. While I wrote, she sorted through all the evidence we'd collected so far, the screenshots of the fake Ben messages, the photos from the USB drive, copies of the police reports, the receipt for the GPS tracker. She put everything in chronological order with tabs and labels, making 3 copies of everything for the judge, Arthur's lawyer, and us. She explained that Arthur's lawyer would probably try to make it seem like I was overreacting, or that Arthur was just trying to reconnect after a bad breakup. We practiced what I would say if I had to testify, how to stay calm and stick to facts instead of getting emotional. She warned me that seeing Arthur again, even on a video screen, might be harder than I expected. The next morning, I had my first appointment with the therapist Officer Garcia had recommended, a woman who specialized in stalking and domestic violence cases. Her office was in a secure building with cameras, and you had to be buzzed in through 2 different doors. She taught me this breathing technique where you count to 4 breathing in, hold for 4, then out for 4, which sounds simple but actually helped when I felt panic starting. We talked about how Arthur had gotten into my head, made me doubt my own judgment, and she explained that was part of the abuse pattern. She showed me how to ground myself when I started spiraling by naming 5 things I could see, 4 I could touch, 3 I could hear, 2 I could smell, 1 I could taste. I scheduled appointments for Tuesday and Friday mornings before work. 4 days later, I was sitting at my desk when my phone buzzed with a Facebook message request from someone named Bradley Jang. The profile looked real enough with photos going back years, but something felt off about the message itself. It said he'd seen me at a coffee shop last week and wanted to introduce himself, but I'd left before he got the chance. The writing style was too familiar, the way he used commas, the specific words he chose. I screenshot everything immediately and called Officer Garcia, who told me not to respond or block the profile yet, so they could trace it. Within 2 hours, she called back to confirm it was Arthur using a VPN and fake account. Since this violated his bail conditions, they were arresting him immediately, and his bail would be revoked at a hearing tomorrow. That night, I actually slept for 6 straight hours without waking up in a panic. Knowing Arthur was locked up waiting for trial made my whole body relax in a way it hadn't in weeks. Travis came over the next day with a notebook where he'd written out different routes I could take to work, to the grocery store, to Willow's place. He'd timed each route and figured out which ones had the most public spaces and security cameras. We practiced varying my schedule, leaving at different times, taking different exits from my building. He bought me this personal alarm that was so loud it hurt your ears, and showed me how to clip it where I could reach it fast. The restraining order hearing was the following Tuesday, and I wore the same outfit Brooke had suggested. Professional, but not too formal. The courtroom was smaller than the one for bail, and Arthur appeared on the screen from jail in his orange uniform. His lawyer argued that a restraining order was unnecessary since Arthur was already under bail restrictions, and would likely accept a plea deal. The judge reviewed all our evidence while Arthur just stared at the camera. When the judge asked if I wanted to speak, I stood up and my voice only shook a little as I explained how Arthur had invaded every part of my life, how I couldn't even trust my own phone anymore. The judge granted a 2-year protection order with all the restrictions Brooke had requested. Arthur would have to stay 500 feet away, couldn't contact me through any method including third parties, and would be arrested immediately if he violated any part of it. After the hearing, Brooke mentioned she ran a support group for stalking survivors that met Wednesday evenings at the community center. I went to my first meeting the next week and sat in a circle with 8 other women and 2 men who'd all been through something similar. Hearing their stories made me realize I wasn't crazy for being scared, that what Arthur did was serious and criminal. One woman had been stalked for 3 years by a coworker, another by her ex-husband who'd hired private investigators to follow her. They shared tips about staying safe and apps that could help track suspicious behavior. 3 weeks passed with Arthur still in jail when the prosecutor called to discuss a potential plea deal. Arthur would plead guilty to stalking and harassment charges in exchange for 2 years probation with mandatory counseling and anger management. The restraining order would become permanent, and any violation would mean immediate prison time. The prosecutor said trials were hard on victims, and this deal would guarantee Arthur had a criminal record, plus strict monitoring. I thought about it for 2 days, talking it over with Willow and Travis and my therapist. The idea of testifying in court, having Arthur's lawyer question me about our relationship, going through everything again in public made me feel sick. I called the prosecutor back and said I'd accept the deal if it meant this would be over. At the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, I got to read my victim impact statement. I stood at the podium with my hands shaking and told the judge how Arthur had destroyed my sense of safety, how I still checked my locks 5 times before bed, how I couldn't date or trust anyone new. Arthur watched me through the video screen with no expression on his face, no sign he understood what he'd done. His lawyer said Arthur accepted responsibility, but when the judge asked Arthur directly if he had anything to say, he just shrugged. The judge upheld all the conditions of the plea deal and added that Arthur would have to wear a GPS ankle monitor for the first year of probation. After all the legal stuff finally ended, I started trying to get back to normal life. I kept all the security measures Travis had set up and still varied my routes to work, but I stopped jumping every time my phone rang. My therapist helped me work on boundaries and trusting my instincts again. I went back to my regular coffee shop and the gym, slowly taking back the spaces I'd avoided. The support group became a weekly anchor where I could talk about the bad days and celebrate the small victories like sleeping through the night or going on a walk alone. Travis showed up the next Saturday morning with his truck and 3 boxes he'd grabbed from the liquor store, saying we needed to get me somewhere Arthur couldn't find me even if he got out. We packed everything I owned in 4 hours, wrapping dishes in newspaper while he took apart my bed frame and carried the mattress down 3 flights of stairs. The new place was across town in a building with better security, keypad entry instead of just regular locks and cameras in every hallway that actually worked. Travis spent the whole day helping me set up, hanging pictures in different spots than my old place, arranging furniture so the apartment felt completely new. He installed extra locks on all the windows and showed me how to use the alarm system that came with the unit. That night, I slept better than I had in months, knowing Arthur had no idea where I was. 6 weeks passed, and I was seeing my therapist twice a week, working through everything that happened. Some days were harder than others, like when I'd smell someone wearing Arthur's cologne at the grocery store and have to leave my cart in the aisle. But the panic attacks were getting less frequent, and I could go whole days without checking over my shoulder constantly. My friends checked in regularly, Willow calling every morning before work just to say hi and make sure I was okay. The therapist taught me breathing exercises that actually helped when I felt that crushing feeling in my chest. I started going back to yoga classes at a new studio where nobody knew my history. One morning, Willow showed up at my door with her beach bag and said we were taking a weekend trip to celebrate my progress. We drove 3 hours to the coast, windows down and music blasting, and I realized I was actually singing along instead of scanning every car that passed us. At the hotel, she'd booked a room with an ocean view, and we spent the first evening just sitting on the balcony watching the waves. The next day, we walked for miles on the beach, collecting shells and letting the cold water wash over our feet. I took my first selfie in months, actually smiling without forcing it, and posted it online without worrying who might see it. That night, we ate too much seafood and laughed until my stomach hurt, and for the first time since everything happened, I felt like myself again. 2 weeks later, I walked back into the bar where everything started, wanting to thank the people who helped me. The manager recognized me immediately and came over to give me a hug, saying she'd wondered how I was doing. Gideon was working, and his face lit up when he saw me looking healthy and calm. They told me they'd changed their whole safety protocol after my situation, training all staff on how to help someone who might be in danger. The manager showed me the new panic button they'd installed under the bar and the direct phone line to the police station. Gideon said they'd already used the new system to help 2 other women who'd been in uncomfortable situations. I stayed for 1 drink, orange juice since I was driving, and thanked them again for possibly saving my life that night. My next therapy session focused on the guilt I still carried about the whole thing. The therapist kept reminding me that Arthur chose to stalk me, that I didn't make him create fake profiles or track my location. She helped me understand that wanting to date again someday didn't make me stupid or weak. We worked through exercises where I had to say out loud that Arthur's crimes weren't my fault. It took weeks, but eventually I could say it without my voice shaking. She also helped me see that my ability to trust wasn't broken forever, just temporarily shaken by someone who abused it. At work, I threw myself into the big project I'd been leading before everything happened. My supervisor noticed how focused I was, staying late to finish presentations and taking on extra responsibilities. When the project wrapped successfully, she called me into her office and offered me the senior position I'd been working toward for 2 years. She said my dedication, despite everything I'd gone through, showed real strength and leadership. The promotion came with a nice raise and my own office with a door that locked. A year after that night at the bar, I could barely recognize the scared person I'd been. I'd built routines that made me feel safe but didn't control my life, like always telling someone where I was going but not obsessing over it. My security habits were just part of my day now, like brushing my teeth or making coffee. I'd started volunteering with Brooke's organization, helping other people navigate the legal system and sharing what I'd learned about staying safe. Every Wednesday, I'd sit with someone new, usually crying and confused, and tell them it would get better, even though it didn't feel like it right now. The volunteering helped me see how far I'd come and gave purpose to everything I'd been through. I finally felt ready to try online dating again, but with completely different boundaries this time. I knew the red flags to watch for now, the questions to ask, and most importantly, I trusted my gut when something felt off. That's a wrap for now. Thanks for just hanging out and exploring all these little details with me. Until next time, subscribe for more content like this.